box. Don't move around on me. All right, here we go. Let's do this.
Let's do the thing.
What's up, Sanity? Good to see you, man. All right, here we go. Hey, everybody. If you're seeing me right now, then it's early on a Saturday morning in the West Coast, but on the East Coast, it's a nice 11 a.m. I'm Andy. Welcome to another wonderful episode of Cafe BTW, a morning gaming podcast. We are going on, I want to say, close to 100 episodes. And what's really cool is, we either have guests on like we do today, and I have the wonderful, you could tell he's a Lions fan, DMC PCRT, who's a good friend of mine on Tick Tock. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How about yourself? Cheers to you, and here's some coffee. Cheers to get the day going.
Yeah. You drink coffee? You better be. You can't
I'm
come
having
on the
some
show
coffee.
unless you drink coffee. And then I don't allow people that don't drink coffee on the show. So I'm just kidding.
What if it was decaf? Am I still allowed?
Yes.
Oh,
decaf has a little bit of caffeine anyway.
Sure does. Yeah.
Apparently.
2 to 10 milligrams, depending on the method of caffeine extraction.
So they're essentially lying to everybody.
But it's decaffeinated. They never say caffeine free. There's just a process of decaffeinization.
Yeah, but hey, man. So here's what we do on the show when I have a guest, because sometimes we don't always have a guest. I'll do a walkthrough. Obviously, the topic today is a really cool one. It's one that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and I thought you'd be a great one to have for it. It's the Sega Master System. We're going to do a little bit of a walkthrough, and what I always say to everyone, I am in no way, shape, or form a historian, but I have done a little bit of research, and we're going to do a brief walkthrough of what we think the history of the Sega Master System is. But I think I've done my research. But DMC, before we get started, we're going to take a step back, and we're going to travel back in time with you. And I would like to ask every single guest, before we learn about what you do on TikTok and whatnot, what's a story you could share with us that sparked your love of gaming from your childhood? Was it going to the store with your parents? What was that one story? We all have stories. So I know you got something in your brain there.
So, I mean, I'm the youngest of 4. So when I grew up, there was always systems. At least it was a Sega Genesis and the NES, and that was always what we had growing up. And I think what really kind of clicked one day was I was playing Sonic 2. And of course, that this is perfect for talking about the Master System and whatnot. But I realized, like, look at these colors. You know what I mean? Like, as a young kid, 3 to 4 or something like that, like, these colors are great. And the music just really, really hit me. And then Castlevania, which I talk about all the time too, when I play that on the NES, I think the same thing. Like, this music really just jumps out at me. You know what I mean? And yeah, those are really the two things that just playing those with my siblings and just kind of really, it was like the first time where media consumption clicked with me, where I'm like, holy crap, like, there's this awesome music and these great colors and this great visuals, and like, I'm doing this on the controller and stuff like that. And then of course, the big one I think was Mortal Kombat, when I did my first fatality.
Were you
when I was about 4.
Did you ever go to the arcades kind of thing as a kid?
So there wasn't much up in like Southeast Michigan. There wasn't a lot of arcades. Like, we would go to things called like Major Magics and stuff like that. But I was a ticket game kid. Like, I would rather play like, the prize games and stuff like that. I guess it's kind of like, people always ask me, like, how did you get into gaming? It's not that I got into gaming. Gaming was just part of the household, if that makes sense. Like, some of my earliest pictures as a kid, I have Street Fighter 2 pajamas, which is kind of funny if you think about it. They're selling pajamas to 2 to 3-year-olds is a fighting game. So it's always just been a part of me, I guess. I did jump out of it for a little bit and then really hit it hard again in the past couple of years. But
when did you start collecting retro games? Because I know you've been, I met you on TikTok. We'll get into that, but
right.
When did you start collecting or recollecting, which I like to say rebuilding your childhood kind of thing?
That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I have 2 phases. That's the best way I would describe it. When I first moved out in 2008-ish, I actually was working for the Goodwill. And there was a Salvation Army down the street too. So now we had to play by the rules, where if anything came in, we had to wait 24 hours before we could buy it. So there was many times where things would come in and I'd be like, come on, man, no one buy this, no one buy this, no one buy this. And I remember once, like, someone donated a NES collection where it had like 15 box games, Super Mario Brothers 3, Castlevania 1 and 2, System, and all this stuff. And my boss priced it for $25. And he's like, if it's out there and open tomorrow, you can buy it. And I didn't even work that day. Like, the next day I was there, and I'm like, all right, cool. So I snagged the whole thing. I actually gave it to my brother. But yeah, so about 2008 to 2011, I was like really kind of building stuff up. I got my first Dreamcast then. I was finding games, luckily, at Salvation Army and Goodwill and all these things. But then I had this dumb idea where I'm like, you know what? I'm moving into my own house soon. Like, let's downsize. So I sold everything. And I built
I was just going to say, buying games in 2008 was a perfect time to start collecting. Prices were affordable. Like, the biggest prices back then were like $50 retro games to $100 maybe, but rarely, right?
And as someone who was making, $7 an hour when I see things like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 3 for the Super Nintendo, I'm like, I can't afford this stuff. And now I just bought Chrono Trigger for $200 because I'm a dummy. But so
that's something, right? Thinking about the comparison between buying Chrono Trigger in 2008 compared to buying it today, where it's just ridiculous.
I thought my brother was crazy when he bought Chrono Trigger in like 09 for 50 to 60. I'm like, dude, that game's old. Like, you can just emulate it. You know what I mean? Now here I am doing the exact same thing 10 years later. But yeah, so then I jumped out of it and I was doing emulation. And about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago at this point, I built my dream computer, our RTX 3080, 5900X, 32 gigs RAM. I was so excited. And the first thing I did is I went on YouTube and looked at Gran Turismo 4 gameplay for the PlayStation 2. I have no idea why, but it was just like, that's what I want to do. Bought that game that day, and that's what sparked it all again. So I bought Gran Turismo 4 for the PlayStation 2, as you say, rebuilding the childhood, because that was a big game I played a lot as a kid. And then the next thing I know, I'm like, Resident Evil 0 would be fun for the GameCube. And I really liked Armored Core 2 for the PlayStation 2. And I told myself, I'm not going to get into the NES. I'm not going to get into the Super Nintendo. But then, well, here we are.
So what is your favorite console, would you say, for the retro era?
I'd like to say my favorite and best. I think the best console is the PlayStation 2. I think it's the best one. Favorite one, though, I find myself playing Super Nintendo a lot. And I've been building up, especially those RPGs. There's just so many great RPGs, especially ones I didn't know about. I just beat Final Fantasy 3, which I knew about, but I just beat it for the first time this year. So, I'm very behind on that. Breath of Fire, I haven't played. Chrono Trigger is going to be a first time. Earthbound, I'm just starting to work through. And that's just some of them, So.
And then, okay, so that's really cool. And, I think we just connected by meeting each other on TikTok, honestly, through the retro community. A while back now, I would like to say. I think we've known each other for a while. And I'm going to get into some cool stuff that we've done collaborative. Yeah. But talk about TikTok, because we have a lot of TikTok guests on the show. And I'm a part of a very early... So I started TikTok, as many know, in late 2019, early 2020. There were literally... DMC, like 5 people on the app in the retro world. Literally at the time, it was oversaturated with dancing and music stuff because Musical.ly had just turned over to TikTok. But what got you into TikTok? What was it that sparked you to be like, all right, I'm going to start doing retro content on TikTok?
So what got me into TikTok is my niece actually would come over and help watch the kids due to the pandemic. So I'm working from home and my kids are also home. And so she would like just send me links to TikToks. She's at the time your typical 14-year-old. And she'd be like, look at this goofy person eating super spicy food or something like that. And I just got sick of having to go on the browser on my phone every time she sent me a link. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to install the app, whatever. And after a little bit, my brother actually, he started doing Lego TikToks. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I was like, I'm getting into this retro thing. I'm ordering mail constantly. I know unboxings, some people like that, and why not? And if you look at my first ever video, which is actually just over a year ago, Tuesday, it's
happy
awful.
Anniversary, happy TikTok anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah, it's horrible. Like I'm holding the camera with one hand and like trying to open up a package with the other, and the lighting is terrible and all this jazz. So yeah, it's definitely improved. Now I have, actual lighting and I have a, tripod and all that. But yeah, it was just kind of a way to fill time, especially going on with, the pandemic. I don't want to bring that up too much, but, I was like, all right, like I'm going to be buying this stuff anyway. Let's just see what happens. And I've always considered myself, not like you said, not a gaming historian, but just someone who likes the history of gaming. And I love to talk if it's not obvious already. So
yeah, and you have a very good radio voice, actually a good voice for a podcast. It's funny. People say that they like my voice for radio, but when I started podcasting, I'm pretty sure my voice really wasn't good. And DMC, I've been podcasting for a long time. Just to give you some background, like I kicked off my first podcast audio in 2014 when Destiny came out, and we did a Destiny podcast.
Oh, nice.
We were one of the first Destiny podcasts, and actually successful. We ran for 4 years, and we were one of the most successful early vanilla Destiny podcasts, I like to say. But then over time, I just kept doing this, and I feel like my voice kind of trained itself to be more of a very like radio-y voice. But I swear my voice was not built for this originally. But you have a very natural sounding, like commercial radio voice.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And I do want to say good morning to everyone. I just didn't want to interrupt DMC. Thanks to everyone that stopped by the Twitch. And yeah, the pandemic for sure seems like that could have drove a lot of people over to TikTok as well.
Right.
At the time, I remember during the height of the pandemic, there was a lot of negativity on Twitter and Instagram, but like TikTok had more of a little bit of a happy vibe going on.
Yeah, I agree.
People were dancing and like singing and doing a little bit of happy things, and that's why I started to get into it. So we have done something really cool on TikTok.
Yeah.
And what we did is we started playing NES Open. And we did 3. And if anyone doesn't know NES Open, it's probably one of the best NES golf games, and if not, one of the best simulation golf games ever made. And and to be honest with you, for the time it came out, it had everything a simulation golf game needed, right? What do you think of NES Open before I get into our little collaboration?
So when we did our collaboration, it was my first exposure with this specific title, but I have to say, as someone who does love golf games, I'm terrible at golf in real life, but I love golf games. It is great. I have had nothing but fun with it. The learning curve is a little steep at first, but after a couple of plays, it's really solid. It's very similar to Mario Golf on the Game Boy Color. In fact, you could argue the gameplay is almost identical, but it's a very, very fun game. Highly recommend it. It's like $10 too. It's pretty cheap.
It's very cheap. It's one of the affordable games out there. Actually, believe it or not, the NES still has a lot of affordable games, even good games.
Yep.
But if you see this video here, you'll see there's 2 screens here. And what we did, which was really clever in so many ways, is we turned NES Open into an online multiplayer game by using TikTok Dual Stream Live. So literally, me and DMC had our respective games playing on each of our respective, my TV's on the left. I have the CRT. I think you had the LCD on the right. But the way we did it was we just played golf. Like we would play the same hole. I would tee off. You would tee off after me. We would take turns just like we were playing real golf. And it worked out. And we did this kind of back and forth. And we did 3 games. You beat me 2 out of 3. But we had this amazing finish I think the first game was the best because I beat you by a stroke. And then our last one, the second one, you destroyed me.
Absolutely.
And then the third one, it was a lot of back and forth, but you still beat me by about 5 strokes. But still, I thought this was really great. And when people came into our stream, they were blown away what we were doing because we really were figuring out a game that didn't have any multiplayer, and using TikTok technology, technically, we turned it into an online multiplayer game.
It was a lot of fun doing that for sure. And I agree, like it was such a cool experiment that we went from concept to doing within like a week essentially, and it worked out great. I was very happy with it.
And then you were doing these awesome like news reports, and they were really fun. And I think what we're wanted to talk about is that I think this summer we'd love to figure out how to do a 16-person tournament. So we're going to let people know about that, but we want to bring in more people to do NES Open and do a full-on tournament this summer for charity. And just so everyone knows, we did play for charity. What was the charity that I donated to because I lost one?
It was Gleaners Food Bank of Southeast Michigan. So it's something that I love supporting. I do an annual charity for them every year, and basically every dollar donated is 6 meals for those in need in Southeast Michigan. And it's a great charity. I've seen them do the work in the community, and it was easy pick when I was like, all right, I want to support that for this. And it was great.
And I had you donate the first loss to Stand Up to Cancer, which is the charity I work with, but the charity I support, and they do cancer research very much in front of it, making sure to get experimental medication to cancer survivors. And we raised over $70, I think, over the course of the 3 matches to support charities. And if we do the 16-person tournament, then we have so many different charities we can bring in that people could donate to and support, because being, adding a layer of charity to gaming, especially when we do something fun like that, it's more rewarding. And I'm glad we decided to do that. So stay tuned, because we were thinking of like, what other games can we do in that fashion? But it's all because of Tick Tock dual streaming that we figured out how to do that. So
right.
So cool, man. I really appreciate sharing a little bit about you and learning a bit about your connection to games and stuff like that. Just one more question. How many games do you think you have in your collection as of now?
I have no idea. I know for sure the one that I have the most for is still PlayStation 2. I just find myself picking up games more and more for that. But if I had to throw a number on it, it's got to be somewhere between probably 250 to 350 right now. Physical games, of course. So
I still got to count mine. I have no idea. I think I have, honestly, I think I probably am hitting close to like 1,500. I might be over.
Dang.
I might be overshooting that a little bit. I either 1,500 or 1,000 for me. But then
That's
you see
awesome.
other people on TikTok that have like Will. Shout out to Will. The Lost in the 80s and 90s. That guy, his basement is like a 1980s nostalgic, like Back to the Future time travels place, and he must have over like 5,000 games. I don't know.
Oh, for sure. And I love that the way he's got it set up, because it's not just games. He does have nostalgia stuff, the McDonald's Happy Meal boxes and old characters that are no longer used and stuff like that. That's a really cool setup. The one thing I always bring up, especially where I'm living now, it's a smaller house, but I call myself a curator more than a collector. I don't just buy games to buy them. Generally, I'm going to buy something that I intend to play eventually. So I'm not going to necessarily pad the collection, if you will, or curation with, baseball games I'm never going to play, or, hockey games from '93 and stuff like that. So not saying that's bad if anybody does it. By all means, go ahead, give those games a home. It does kind of bum me out when I just see them rotting away in game stores. So if you're interested, those games were still fun. It's just not ones that I'll find myself playing anytime soon.
Yeah. I like collecting sport games. I don't mind.
I'm not knocking sports games. Like
actually,
I love golf games.
Shout out to my friend Sanity, who was in chat. He gave me he's like, hey dude, do you want these Madden games? So he gave me like a stack of I'm like, yeah, I'll take the Madden games. So he gave me like a stack of Madden games. So I still have them. So shout out. Mikey says the PS2 library is pretty huge. It is very big.
It is massive.
It is massive. But that's one I don't have much of. As a kid, I had a friend that had the PlayStation. I would go to my friend's house for the PlayStation. And the PS2, I was more the Dreamcast guy, but I definitely played the PS2 as well. But let's get into the topic at hand. And I just want to caveat again, we are in no way, shape, or form historians. We are retro lovers, and today is really interesting. We're going to talk about the Sega Master System. And before we get into a little bit of a timeline history I got here, DMC, what does the Sega Master System mean to you? What stories do you have to tell me before we kick into this?
The Master System has always been a elusive thing. It was something I knew about growing up, and it was always a fascinating piece of tech. In fact, when it comes to finding a Master System, I can remember only one time I ever saw one in person, and it was when I was about 12 or 13 at a local flea market. I actually did a video of a Dixieland flea market. I saw this weird pyramid-looking system. I'm like, what the heck is that? And my brother's like, oh yeah, that's the Master System. It's what came out before the Sega Genesis. And in my mind, it was Sega came out at the Genesis. Like that's when the company first existed. So it was just this massive mind blow of like, holy moly, Sega's been around for how long? But as far as playing the games, it was always emulation, or sometimes they had like, Game Gear, which we'll get into that, games ported into, the Sonic Mega Collection and things like that. So for me, it's actually kind of a new, like finally having one. I've got it playing in the back here right now, but it was always more of like an oddity that I read about and was just like, man, one of these days I'm going to have this system. Like it was almost like an obsession for something I never had, but I feel like I knew it, if that makes any sense.
No, that totally makes sense. And to share my background with it, it's really interesting. Being an American, growing up, I skew a little older. I grew up in the 80s, went to high school in the early 90s. So I was around when the Master System was trying to sell itself in America, right? Which we'll get into a little bit deeper. But my story is, so I lived on this cul-de-sac, and across the street, and I've told this before, I had a very wealthy friend. He was the same age as me. He had a Double Dragon arcade cabinet in his house in 1987. So just to give you, no one ever had an arcade cabinet in their home, they had to be really wealthy at the time, right?
Right.
So he had a Sega Master System, and I got to, as a kid, one of the rare, because a lot of American kids, you ask them, did you ever play the Master System growing up in the 80s? And a lot of them, or the late 80s, and a lot of them will say no, never. But he had a Master System, and we played the crap out of it. And I still remember like seeing it laid out and always thinking it looked really cool. Like it had a really cool shape about it, and it was really interesting. And Mikey, we're going to get into all of that. Don't you worry.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that it was just really interesting. And he was one of those kids that just had everything, and including the Master System. And just to note, like a kid having the Master System actually in their collection back then was really, really rare in America. But let's get, before we get into the Master System, we got to talk a little bit about the Sega history. And I have a little timeline pulled up. So the earliest timeline, good morning, Retro Game Brews. What's up?
Good morning.
The earliest time that Sega originated was in 1940, DMC. Sega originated in 1940 as Standard Games, a coin-operated game company in Hawaii. So it did not start in Japan. And in 1940, American businessman, which is really interesting here. Everyone thinks of Sega Japanese, and it is a Japanese company, but it wasn't founded and started by Japanese people. It was actually started by an American. So his name was Martin Bromley and Irving Bromberg and James Harper, who formed Standard Games in Hawaii. So did you know that? Did you have any idea that it was actually Americans that can be originated all the way back to the start of Sega, which is really interesting?
I actually just learned about that 6 months ago myself. I always thought, like you said, it was, they were based out of Japan always, but that's not the case.
So, yeah, and then let's move up to 1952. While providing games for military bases, the company was called Standard Games, but following a move to Japan in 1952, the company renamed Service Games of Japan. After the United States government outlawed slot machines, its territories in 1952, Bromley sent employees Richard Stewart and Ray Lemire to Tokyo to establish Service Games of Japan to provide coin-operated slot machines to the United States bases in Japan. Super interesting history here, because it's really like that blew me away that like really Sega didn't derive through Japan. It went to Japan. The name Sega is an abbreviation of Service Games, was first used in 1954 on a slot machine called Diamond Star. And then moving up to the 60s, due to notoriety rising from investigations by the U.S. government into criminal business practices, Service Games of Japan was dissolved on May 31st, 1960. And then let's move up the timeline here. I think it was in 1973, Sega released Pongtron, the first video game-based game in 1973. And then in 1979, saw the release of Head On, which introduced Eat the Dots gameplay Namco later used in Pac-Man. In 1981, Sega licensed and re-released Frogger, its most successful game. And then as we move into the 80s, Sega was a very well-known arcade developer. They made tons of arcade ports and so forth, so on. Now, moving into the home console era, they saw an opportunity. There was a lot of talk about the Famicom in Japan, and there was the first ever true home console for the Sega, which wasn't good at all. It was called the SG-1000. Do you know anything about the SG-1000?
Oh, yeah. I know about it. It is, like you said, it's a mess.
And the controller looks horrible.
Oh, yeah. I love talking about controllers, and that is easily one of the most offensive looking controllers I've ever seen. It has this little narrow joystick, which there's just no way this thing is comfortable. And then this extremely long pad with 2 buttons on the sides. The games are extremely archaic. It's also extremely expensive if you want to get into collecting for this thing. It is a very, very pricey system to try and collect for. And it was only in Japan, if I remember properly.
That's correct.
Collecting for it would be tough to begin with. But it was a big flop for them. I'm actually surprised they tried to proceed into the home gaming market after that thing.
So the SG-1000 sold 160,000 units in 1983, which far exceeded their expectations. But 50,000 in the first year was... But then, of course, the Famicom outpaced it. But let's not forget the next system they created, which was the Mark III.
Look at that thing.
That thing looks cool. I mean,
that's awesome. Yeah.
The Mark III looks cool, but the problem with the Mark III is at this time, the Famicom I'm sorry, at this time is the video game Crash of 1983, which is thanks to Atari and the wonderful game E3. Shout out to Retro Game Brews, who had the original developer of the Atari ET. So check out his episode. He did a full interview with what's his name? Put it in chat. I forget his name. I'm really sorry. I'm blanking.
Nolan Bushnell? Is that
no. The guy who developed Yar's Revenge and ET.
Gotcha.
I'm totally blanking on his name, but I'm sure Retro Game Brews will put it in. He said Retro Game Brews says Data East was making pinball machines under the Sega name, which is weird to me. That is
Sega
weird.
Loved licensing out their name in the 90s, though, which we'll talk about that too.
Thank you. The great. I'm so sorry, Howard. I totally blanked on your name. Howard Scott Warshaw was the guy who single-handedly was a part of the market crash, but not his fault. It was really Atari's fault for rushing him to make a game in like 6 weeks.
Right.
And that's a whole nother story. But if you want to check out the episode, Retro Game Brews, feel free to share it in chat. It's a really wonderful interview learning about that history and stuff like that. The Famicom comes out in Japan and it becomes a massive success, right? And that really shadows what the Sega was doing with the Mark III and really a problem for them. And then, of course, moving up, they eventually, to combat the release of the Famicom, they create their own 8-bit system, the Master System. And there it is in all of its beauty. And they do want to compete in Japan and the U.S. market because the Famicom comes out in the Japan, and then later the NES, which is a American-formed version of the Master System comes out. I'm sorry, of the Famicom comes out. But there's a problem, DMC. The Famicom and the NES are just too powerful, successful in both these regions, and the Master System fails to sell very well. But I do want to note, though, the Master System was actually a little bit stronger and more powerful than the NES and the Famicom. So the Master System is generally more powerful console than its main rival, the Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as the Famicom in Japan. The NES had an 8-bit memory architecture with a CPU, the MOS 6502 with additional features. These are big words for me. The Master System, on the other hand, had a hybrid 8 to 16-bit memory architecture. So it actually, in these technical words, was more powerful, and it actually was great. I mean, did you like the look of Master System games compared to the NES version games?
Oh yeah, and I want to touch on one thing real quick.
Please,
by the
touch.
The Mark III is the Master System.
Yes, correct.
So yeah, I just want to make sure we say that it was exported as the Master System.
They redesigned it,
and then they rebranded it in Japan afterwards as the Master System, which is very funny. But back on the graphics thing, I love the way it looks. As I've been playing the system more, I'm like, wow, this looks awesome. How did this lose? One big thing I want to touch on, though, I love the way it looks. I am not crazy about how it sounds. The audio on the Master System and also the Game Gear is bad. It's really like bubbly.
The NES had a better sound card than the sound chips than the.
If there's one thing Nintendo absolutely dominated on between the NES and the Super Nintendo, it was their sound chips, and we all know about the legendary sound chip in the Super Nintendo. But the music in the NES is just far superior. It's almost a less is more kind of thing because it feels like the Master System could pump out more bass and things like that. And then if you could get one that has the FM synthesizer, you have an extended range of sound. But I don't think it's even used on the West. I think it's only for Japanese games. But I love the way they look. Some of the games look fantastic, like Sonic the Hedgehog, which I do have running back here, but you can't see it. Looks awesome on the system. It runs really well. It is surprising that it's an 8-bit game. Like I couldn't believe it when I was playing this. Like this was, an 8-bit game. Mind you, it's later in the life of the system. They can push more. But Phantasy Star, for instance, looks fantastic on the system. Zillion is a fun little weird one. And the games look good. I like the way they look. It's almost surprising that it's just an 8-bit system at that point,
Yeah, and what's really interesting is, Nintendo was scary. They were telling their developers, you can only develop for us. You should only develop for the Nintendo and not Sega. So they had a problem with third-party, the Sega Master System at the time, but there were two developers that actually supported the Sega Master System, and that was Activision and Parker Brothers were the only two third-party developers that really supported during the NES Famicom movement. But obviously, in America, it was a failure. But then the Sega Master System, let's do something silly and stupid. Let's sell the marketing licensing rights to Tonka, the goddamn toy company, so that they could fix the problem in America. But, Tonka didn't do a very good job, and it was the oddest, investment. I guess Tonka was saying, we make these toy trucks that are really popular. Let's get into video games. So let's buy the marketing licensing rights in America from Sega to resell the Master System. Did you know that? Did you know that Tonka?
I did not. This is news.
This is news. To me. So this is really funny.
That is hilarious.
And thanks so much for being our first-time chatter Rocket. And he's with Team DMC. I'm sure he watched our golf tournaments, I'm assuming. But
Rocket's my boy. Thanks, Rocket, for popping in, bud.
So in comes Tonka DMC, but Tonka fails miserably and can't do a goddamn thing to beat the NES in the marketplace. And later on, Tonka actually sells back the licensing rights to Sega. But let's talk about one region that Sega's like, all right, we're not giving up just yet, okay? We are not giving up. And they're like, yes, we failed in the Japan market. We failed with Tonka in the American market. Where can we go? And there was one region, which we're going to get into two regions, actually. But the first region is, what is this map showing here? It's showing Europe. So Nintendo actually was not fully in the European region during the success of Japan and America. Did you know that, DMC?
Yes, and Nintendo's European, like late 80s, early 90s history is kind of weird because they didn't do much with the Super Nintendo in comparison as well. So this was prime for Sega to jump in here and be like, hey, this is our chance. Let's pal it up.
So Sega makes, just like they made a deal with Tonka in America, which failed miserably, they worked with a company called Mastertronic in Europe to help them license and market in the European market.
Look at that logo.
Mastertronic, yes. Now, Mastertronic had major success with this because they took control and the European market did super well. In 1987, they released the Master System in Europe, and it was in a renowned success because they took a lot of the market share from the 8-bit era that Nintendo was not taking advantage of. So that's a really interesting tidbit. And Mastertronic pushed a few of these very important games that came from the arcade. We had Hang On, which was a huge successful Master System game and a popular arcade game that they used to really spice up and sell in Europe. Another game that was very popular for the European market to sell, again, Outrun, another arcade classic that also was very successful in Europe as one of their leading games. Another game, DMC, that was very popular as well. Another Sega, and here's the advantage of Sega, is that they were so successful in the arcade, porting these games over to the Master System was one of the smartest things they ever did. Afterburner was another fantastic game that did really
just
well.
Look at that. That's an 8-bit system. That's not the arcade version, right? That's the Master System version?
This is the Master System version.
Look at that.
Correct.
Just that's mind-blowing. You wouldn't see that on the NES. That looks so good.
Another game, which was one of my favorite arcade games as a kid, is Space Harrier, believe it or not. Was also successful in the European market on the Master System as well. So Sega was so smart. They could have gave up and said, we're screwed. We can't fight against the market in Japan and America, but they took advantage of a region that was not being taken over by the conglomerate Nintendo at the time, which were scary. You know that Nintendo literally told consumers in America, we will not let you sell Nintendo games, Nintendo systems, if you're selling our competitor system. They scared the crap out of retails. You can't do that today, obviously, but back then they took advantage of that. Biff Bonus says, never got into Space Harrier myself. I liked Space Harrier. It was fun. And here is another. Who's this guy? Do you know this guy right here? Have you ever seen this guy? Who is that?
He looks familiar to me, but I can't.
This is Richard Branson, the guy that owns Virgin. Yep. Correct.
That's what I thought.
So Richard Branson sees the success of the Sega Master System in Europe and says, I'm going to buy Mastertronics. So he literally dives in, and Richard Branson steps in and offers to buy 45% of Mastertronic's stake in exchange for Mastertronic to join the Virgin Group. So they end up calling Mastertronic the Virgin Mastertronic Limited. So Richard Branson bought the rights to the distributor and marketing arm of Sega in Europe. And that is something that probably a lot of people didn't realize, but Richard Branson had a little bit of his feet wet in the video game market in the late 80s.
Nice.
So really, the history here is really cool. But then DMC, here comes Sega coming in to the 16-bit era with the Mega Drive, and of course the Genesis, where they finally find success. And this literally is when they say to Tonka, give us our goddamn marketing license back. Go back to making trucks. We're coming back to America. And that's where they got back their license from Tonka. But this caused a major problem for the Sega Master System. Obviously, it was an outdated system. There was problems there. But oh yeah, I have this picture of Tonka. Really a funny part of video game history a lot of people didn't know about, which I thought was hilarious.
Ironically, Tonka couldn't get the tires moving for it.
So Sega wasn't done, though, with the Master System, okay? Oof. And they come out with the Master System 2. And one thing that's very important here is, what is this place?
Oh, yeah, there's Brazil. Let's go. Let's talk about it.
DMC, what is this? This is Brazil, right?
Right.
So why am I showing a map of Brazil? People must be wondering.
That is where the Master System still sells to this day. It is one of the best-selling consoles there. It's basically the selling console there. That and the Mega Drive.
So, again,
there they are.
Getting into another distributor, this company called Tech Toy, they're actually the ones that said to Sega, hey, there's actually no market for video games in Brazil right now. And don't forget, at this time, the Mega Drive Genesis, they're all out. The Super Nintendo, they're all doing their thing. But Tech Toy, which was a company in Brazil, was like, yo, Sega, can you sell us the marketing rights to the Master System? Because we're going to sell it down here. And
it's not just the marketing rights, too. It was production.
Production and distribution. Yep.
Yep.
But Tech Toy, and it's really just like fascinating. This whole story, I don't think people realize how fascinating this whole Master System story is. But here is Tech Toy coming in and breathing life to the system beyond the era of the 8-bit era. And really, really fascinating in so many ways. They sold over 8 million Sega Master Systems in Brazil. DMC, 8 million. Yep. Can you believe that?
It's bonkers. And like it's such a fascinating, almost perfect storm, like we were saying, because Brazil has high import and export taxes. I believe that's part of the reason. And like you said, Tech Toy is like, hey, we'll just make them here. We can make this. It's cheap now because it's outdated tech. Let's just put it all together here. We don't have to worry about all that. And it's the system. No other gaming company was touching Brazil. It was basically untouched due to this. So Tech Toy was able to corner that market and still does. It's hilarious if you look at the stuff that's being released now. These 201, 401 systems that have Mega Drive and Master System games on them. And they produced a ton of stuff for it as time went on. Like Mortal Kombat 2 has a Tech Toy Master System release, which is hilarious. And there's so many. Yeah, look, you've got the list here of some stuff.
These are 25 or a few of the most successful only released in Brazilian market games that came out for the Sega Master System. A game I've never heard of.
Your first one there says 97, right?
1997.
Yep. Yeah, 97. Good Lord.
95. Look at the Virtual Fighter Animation 1997. This is cool. This is a cool game, by the way. This is only unique to Brazil. It never came out anywhere else. Mickey's Ultimate Challenge, which is a Disney. 98. Earthworm Jim came onto the Master.
That's a fun port.
1996. Legend of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse in 1998. We're talking about big licensing here. This is Disney down in Brazil on a Sega Master System. In 1992, we had Ariel's Little Mermaid. In 1996, the wonderful FIFA International Soccer.
Which is a big reason why it sold so well is because the soccer games were on them. So.
And the Brazilian football or soccer market was huge.
Yep.
Here's your Mortal Kombat 3, which came out in 1996.
3. I didn't even know 3 came out on it.
Yeah, 1996, man. Taz in Escape from Mars for 1997. Disney again with Disney's Bonkers Wax Up. I don't think I've ever played that. 1998. We're coming close to the Dreamcast release.
And PlayStation 2. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about. 128-bit systems.
Sonic Blast in 1997.
Which is a port of a Game Gear game, so...
Some game in Portuguese I don't understand. Echo, the Dolphin, of course. X-Men Mojo World. Interesting.
Yeah.
We got Dynamite Heady. Quest of the Shaven Yak starring Ron Yoke and Stimpy. Ren and Stimpy, but in like Portuguese, I think. They speak Portuguese in Brazil, right?
I think that's what it is. I'm not 100% sure.
Baku Baku Animu, Battletoads and Battle Maniacs.
Whoa, that looks rad.
Another game that looks like Woody Woodpecker here. I can't read this. But yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. All these 90s Sega Master System games.
Right. And it's funny because I've looked into importing one of those before, but they are PAL, I believe. It's all 50 hertz and they won't up convert. So one cool thing about Master System, and if you're going to touch on this, I'm sorry for getting ahead,
No.
is that you can bring in a lot of the European games to NTSC, and it will run at 60 frames per second like it's supposed to. It's just downclocked when you're playing it on a PAL system. It's not a different cartridge at all. So like my Sonic the Hedgehog, which is complete from Europe, was like $30. It was super cheap to bring over here. I just had to wait for a while. That plays totally normal, full speed on my system, and it's way cheaper than trying to find an American release, which those go for way, way more. So yeah, if you ever want to get into the Master System, import them from Europe.
Yep. And also, shout out to Crunchy Kong, awesome retro gamer on Twitter. He says DMC sounds like Jim Halbert, John Krasinski.
I get that all the time.
Do you?
All the time. Seriously, if you check out my one of my most recent videos, I've got probably 100 comments where someone's saying like, "Hey, is this Jim? I didn't know Jim likes retro games." And it's like, all right.
Can you say Michael and Pam for me then?
Michael and Pam.
All right, there we go from The Office. I didn't know I had the wonderful John Krasinski in a Lions hat talking about Sega Master System today.
I've got a skit coming up for that one of these days. I just have to wait for the right comments. So.
Crunchy says it's awesome, and thanks Crunchy for stopping by, man. It's good to see you.
Sure.
Crunchy was also a guest on the show. He has an awesome arcade collection himself. And just to note, Alex the Kid has to be noted because Alex the Kid was sort of the face of the Sega Master System beyond Sonic. Alex the Kid was the guy. I played the crap out of this game, by the way, on the Genesis, but didn't really play it on the Master System. And another game to note is Phantasy Star started on the Master System and became one of the greatest, in my opinion, awesomest, Sega's franchises, and a huge fan base behind Phantasy Star. Yep. Is that it on your awesome orange game? Was that from Video Game Historian
or Video Game Restoration? Yeah.
Sorry, not Historian. Yep. He was also on the show. We talked about restoration and stuff, so that was cool. I'm just stealing people from Tick Tock all the time. Biff Bubbins says, "Good luck getting Dwight to tune into the episode." Shunned.
So it's awesome you bring up Phantasy Star because this could be arguably the biggest technical. I'm trying to think of the best word here. Feat for the system. It's a beautiful game. The sound is pretty solid for it. I do know a lot of people say that it's very grindy. I actually just picked up an official cartridge the other day, but I have it on the Sega Ages for the Switch, and they've added a map which they didn't have back then, and reduced the enemy encounters and whatnot because of that. But Phantasy Star is rad. It is such a cool feat for the system, and it really got things going for Sega's RPGs, which they don't do much of. As you say, they're more of a arcade porting and action beat 'em up kind of system. So something like Phantasy Star is awesome to see on there.
Beautiful looking too on the
Master system. Oh, look at this. Again, this is an 8-bit system. Look at this. It's got this first person hallways when you're going into the dungeons. So cool.
Really great.
So cool.
And then let's look at just these are from Retro Dodo, which is a really cool site, by the way. And if you follow Retro Dodo on social, really cool. This is Retro Dodo's top 25 best Master System games of all time. So let's through these. Let's do it. Double Dragon, number 25.
Just pick that up.
How much are the, I don't collect a lot. I have Master System games, but are they getting pricey, or are they a little bit mixed? Pretty much.
It's pretty much the big boys are going to be the ones that are always going to be expensive. Phantasy Star complete in box is about $100. I think EST is also $100.
Considering the market today, it's not too out of reach.
That's not awful. Dragon Warrior 3 and 4 loose for the NES are 130 or higher. So in comparison, if you can get a complete in box Phantasy Star for 100, that's not too bad. But a lot of the games, there's so much monopoly out there, dude. As you mentioned, Parker Brothers being one of the few third-party developers, there's so many copies of Monopoly out there. A lot of the games that are dirt cheap because they were built into the system. Excuse me. So Super Hang-On, like you mentioned, you can find that complete for pennies and whatnot. But I'd say complete in box is usually 20 to 40, depending on the game. The RPGs are going to always cost more, and then Sonic and Sonic 2 are pricey for sure. Yeah, just because of their clout. But Marble Madness there, for instance, is $20. I think Double Dragon cost me $16.
Ooh,
so actually got it for free. So
Shinobi, these are all just amazing games. Let's see, we got Chase HQ, we got Outrun, of course. We got California games. Awesome.
There you
California games. Love California games. We got Ghouls and Ghosts, which is obviously a classic.
I think that's a pricier one. Yeah.
Fantasy Zone, which is one I'm not familiar with.
It's a left-right shooter, I believe.
Oh wait, yes, this is a very good. This is a shoot 'em up. That's pretty
it's a
popular.
wacky one.
Wacky one, but it's popular, I believe, and it was pretty successful. Operation Wolf, which we're familiar with. What else we got here? Fantasy Star, of course. We talked about it. We got how do I say this? Gulvilius.
Oh, it's
Valley of the
lowering. It's lowering the quality on my side here.
And
I think you're saying it right though. Gulvilius.
Afterburner, of course.
Of course.
Vampire Master of Darkness. Ooh.
Okay, so this is Castlevania.
Oh, is it?
It's basically Castlevania. It's their take on it. You're playing in the early 1900s, and you're playing as a vampire killer. But it's like,
is it their own version of a Castlevania?
Yeah, okay. It's a Castlevania clone essentially. But yeah, it's you got the stale jumping when you go forward. Like you have to dedicate to the path that you're going. You pick up weapons. I've played it. And I love the idea, but I also love vampires. I think they're rad. There's super cool lore. And yeah, I mean, look at that. It looks just like Castlevania there.
How much is this one really pricey? That's cool.
I've never even seen this one in person. I'm pretty sure it's an expensive one. I think the Game Gear version of it goes for like $60. So
okay.
Yeah.
Lucky Dime Caper starring Donald Duck. All right. Do you know anything about this one?
Disney games don't really have much of a nostalgia for me. I didn't really grow up as a Disney kid. I was very much a Nickelodeon, like MTV kid due to my older siblings. So I didn't really get into like any Disney games besides like The Lion King and Aladdin for the Super Nintendo. So I don't have too much knowledge on those.
And then we got Space Harrier, which I have a good connection with Space Harrier because I used to play it in the arcades as a kid in the 80s. So I have a fond memory. And let's not forget the really cool look of the Sega Master System boxes with that kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it. It almost
the grid work.
It's like a grid work, like you're in like a 3D environment, or like I would say it's Star Trek, a holodeck kind of.
I love, you know what? That's a good way of looking at it is like the holodeck. Yeah. I love and hate it at the same time because it almost feels like a businessman's like meeting room where it's like, hey, we're just gonna throw all this stuff on a grid. I don't know, like if you look at the font used for a Master System, it looks so like Times New Roman businessy, and it's like so cool and also so bad at the same time in my opinion. But I don't know, one thing Nintendo definitely had the leg up on is their artwork on their boxes is way cooler.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, eventually when the Genesis came out, they got rid of that kind of like
awesome.
I think they
Genesis
were just
sick stuff.
They were probably just looking for like something with continuity on the boxes.
Exactly, it's identifiable. You know it's theirs. Yep, all the side strips are almost identical. It's really not until later that they started changing. With like Sonic the Hedgehog and Rampage and stuff like that. Most of the strips on the side is just text at the top with the grid work. So I'll give them that, kind of like the PlayStation 2 and things like that. A lot of the siding is uniform,
Yeah. We got Land of Illusion with Mickey Mouse. A lot of Disney IPs.
A lot of Disney.
And then let's see, we're going to number 8. We got Sonic Chaos.
Very good.
Very good game. Then we got Road Rash, popular arcade game port, of course. Alex the Kid, which we talked about. It's an interesting, I like the cover. It's kind of a very simple box cover, actually.
Right. And Alex Kidd was supposed to be their mascot. A lot of people, don't remember that or know that, but Alex Kidd was their mascot. And then they made Sonic, and it was like, never mind.
How do I say this? Concedin? I don't know.
It looks like that. I've not heard of this one. Looks like a beat 'em up, maybe.
Looks kind of like an updated Kung Fu or something.
Oh yeah.
Golden Axe, of course.
Which is this is
Golden
their
Axe
Zelda
Warrior.
clone.
Oh,
it's like Warrior. A Zelda clone where it's supposed to be the top-down adventure game in the Golden Axe world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Then let's see. We got Fantasy Zone 2, which is that shoot 'em up we talked about.
Yep.
Then we got Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Sega Master System,
which it's far superior compared to the Game Gear version. Which we'll touch on that soon.
And then finally, we got Psycho Fox.
That's their number one game?
That's their number one game.
I've never even heard of it. What I think is surprising is Sonic the Hedgehog is left off because I feel like Sonic 1 is way better than Sonic 2.
But what about Psycho Fox?
Never heard of this. I don't even know what this is.
Well, here it is. That's what he said.
It's the best game ever for the Master System. All right. I have to see how much this goes for because what is this game?
You know a bit more than me about the Game Gear porting to the Sega Master System. Let's quickly touch on that. So
sure.
What was it about the Game Gear? Ooh, that's very fuzzy. Oh, no, there we go. What was it about the Game Gear that helped the Sega Master System or vice versa?
the Game Gear essentially was developed as a portable master system. In house, it's almost was referred to as that. The games that run on the Game Gear were often ported over to the master system afterwards, or sometimes vice versa. But the hardware is extremely similar, and some even speculate the Game Gear is just a little bit better. And that's part of the reason why you can't play Game Gear games. They never made anything to allow you to play Game Gear games on the Master System because it didn't have the same internals and it wasn't something that's so similar to do. But what's fun, again, I'll bring this up. I don't know if you can see it on the camera here, but right there, we've got Phantasy Star running on my Game Gear here. And you can actually buy converters that will allow you to plug in Master System cartridges to your Game Gear and take them on the go, which if I was a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, and was able to take my cartridge from the home console system and plug it into my handheld and go, that would have just blown my mind. That's such a cool concept. And Sega was very big on doing this. We all know about the Nomad later on, which was something really cool where it's just a portable Genesis. So it was their first foray into doing this, but that was definitely what Sega was going forth, But yeah, the Game Gear is a lower resolution screen. So it's odd because when you play Master System games on it, it kind of cuts off just a little bit of the sides. But when it comes to playing some games like Sonic 2, like we were talking about, it's so zoomed in that it's miserable to play Sonic 2 on the Game Gear. I hate it. I hate it because you can barely see what's coming forth. And like the first boss is near impossible. I've never beaten the first boss on the Game Gear version, but I get through it on my first try on the Master System. And
wow.
yeah, it's bizarre, but that's where it's at. I love the Game Gear. It's a fun novelty. Clearly, I've invested into getting one updated and all that kind of stuff. But I definitely view it more as a portable master system now that I know about those capabilities to be able to play these home console games on the go.
Yeah, no, that's really cool take. I didn't really look into a lot of the Game Gear connection, but I knew you knew a lot about that. And now, I didn't have a Game Gear growing up, but I did have a Nomad. And
Nice.
I still remember going on road trips with the Nomad and being so happy to be playing Genesis, in the backseat of a car. Although the battery life wasn't great, just always had to make sure to have a lot of battery life.
Right. Which the Game Gear didn't have a good battery life either. Yeah.
What did you need? 8 batteries in there?
You need 6. Yeah.
6.
Yeah, I've got custom battery packs in this now that use USB-Cs, thank God, because this thing just eats through batteries. It's like 2.5 hours, I think. But again, you have to remember, this is a home console built into your pocket, essentially, just a few years after it came out.
So Biff says, do you recall a Street Fighter-like game that was animals fighting? I think it was Sega. I'm not sure.
No, I don't remember that. And I can think of like Clay Fighter maybe, but that's about it.
So to finish off the show, and DMC, this has been really great, and I hope
it's already been an hour.
we've flown by, but it was really, I love doing these like kind of like retrospective looks because I learn a lot more and I find out things I never knew about. Like Tonka was probably one of the coolest.
Never knew that.
Footnotes in the Sega Master.
That's so weird.
In the Sega Master System history. But I always try to figure out what's a good question I can ask that relates to the podcast on Twitter. And today I asked, did you own a Sega Master System or know someone that did back in the day? And we got a lot of comments to read through. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I'd love to feature a few of them and see what other people had experienced. And by the way, a lot of people commented and we got over 156 likes on this. So there was obviously a lot of... a lot of people had connections to the Master System. So Simon B says, I did not, but at my local rental store had the adapter that allowed you to play Master System games on the Mega Drive. So occasionally I would rent it and a handful of MS games. Lyrical Magical J says, that was my first home console. It was all about Alex the Kid.
Nice.
The Nintendo dork, I do now. Love the thing. I missed out. Sophie says, oh yeah, I even amassed a big collection in the early 90s as a gamer and a fan of the system. Let's move down a little bit. This guy seems to have loved Rambo. He says, my neighbor had one.
Common one to find that game. Yeah, a lot of people like that one.
We always used to play Rambo on there. John Knight says, my mates all had the Master System too, and everyone knew Alex the Kid in Miracle World backwards. We had a Commodore 64. I bought a Mega Drive with the multi-cart, which I used to play my Master System games. Also, the Mega Drive was backwards compatible with an adapter.
And let's bring that up real quick. That adapter doesn't do anything besides letting the system read the cartridge because the Genesis and Genesis 2 have Master System components just built into the hardware. It actually is baked right in. So that adapter only allows you to put the cartridge in. There's no hardware in that.
And then we got RU says, this was one of my jams. I was a kid and I loved Mad Magazine. So Spy vs. Spy.
Oh yeah, we didn't even touch on the cards. Yeah.
Someone wrote in some other language. Let's translate this. The emulator of the time at home was the Family Game, Chinese copy of the Nintendo NES. You didn't get much of that Master System in Argentina, but in Brazil, they made love to the Master System, which we talked about.
That's a fun way to translate it.
Richard says, I had a cousin in Puerto Rico that had one. We played it a great many times during summer breaks. I do remember being confused initially. I owned a Genesis by that point, and I'm like, Master System? That sounds like it should be better than the Genesis by name alone. It's true.
That's a good point. It does. That sounds sick.
And then, let's see, Royal says, I've never played the Sega Master System. That's the one that got away from me. I did not see the point in going back to play it when I got older. What are some of the best games to play on it? And then Colin says, besides the arcade stuff, Space Harrier, Shinobi, Outrun, Fantasy Zone, Hang On, it was some of the great stuff, especially Phantasy Star with Alex the Kid games as well. The 8-bit Sonic games, the Wonder Boy games, Golden Axe, Castle of Illusion, Aladdin, Psycho. Wow, the list goes on. He's right.
That's good stuff.
And Biff says the game he was asking about is called Brutal Paws of Fury.
That's the first time I heard of that.
And then finally, let's read a couple more. Let's look for a good one. When I was younger, it was the original plan to get a Sega Master System, but something in my heart changed at the last second. I bought a Nintendo. I'm sure many people did.
Yeah.
And then finally, our last comment here, had the Master System 2. Unfortunately, mine had Alex the Kid and not Sonic built in.
I don't know if Sonic was ever built into any of the Western releases.
I don't think it was, but we'll finish with one more. Richard, he was the last comment, so we'll read it. In the UK, this was a standard 8-bit console back then. Everyone had one. The NES was very rare, I think. I only knew one person who had one. I'm guessing the opposite is true in America. He's absolutely correct, which is really interesting because they took over the year. It's not interesting in the fact that we went through it where it makes sense that in Europe, it was like reverse. Like in America, you barely knew anyone who had a Master System, but in Europe, you barely knew anyone that had an NES.
Right.
Really crazy, man. I mean, that kind of sums it all up for us today. What did you think? Any takeaways from our little excursion through the Master System history?
Tonka, man, I can't believe that they decided, we're going to go with the toy truck manufacturer. They're going to know what to do when it comes to distributing video game systems. But I mean, that's Sega. They love licensing out their stuff. They still do to this day with all the, crazy little third-party stuff that they put out there. And even when they re-released the Game Gear, they let Majesco have at it. And games, like, the Sega Genesis 3 is not technically a Sega product. It's a Majesco product. So that's just classic Sega, letting it fly and see what happens. So.
I love it. Well, dude, we definitely had your stuff in chat. I'm going to put it back in. So if anyone wants to check out DMC, check out chat. I just dropped it. I want to say thank you to everyone on VOD. We appreciate you as well. And anyone that missed the show, we always put the VOD on YouTube right after. So we'll have that up immediately following this. But DMC, tell us a little bit about what we can expect from you on your TikTok coming up. Any places, anything exciting besides just your typical daily stuff?
So, I mean, obviously, I do a lot of unboxings. I do walkthroughs of stores. We went on a big Thursday. We went on an excursion for 7 different video game stores, which was a big hit. You knew that. I was messaging you as we were doing it. And so you're going to see, a nice tour of Southeast Michigan video game stores coming up here soon. I also just picked up some bangers when it comes to Super Nintendo games. We're working through Earthbound every Tuesday until we beat that. Immediately afterwards, we're going to put in Chrono Trigger and then probably move into Breath of Fire and stuff like that as well. But for now, I'm going to just keep trying to touch on some history like we're doing right now, some interesting little factoids here and there, and just keep an eye on the TikTok. I try to upload every 2 to 3 days at minimum. And from there, we'll just keep going. Twitch Mondays as well. We're going to move on to Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Monday.
Awesome. So, yeah, you're playing a bunch of great games. And, look forward to doing some more collaborations with you aside from NES Open, or continuing to do some cool stuff around that game as well.
Sure. Yeah, we got our bowling that we're going to try and figure out, right?
Yep. I have that game on its way, so I should get it next week. I eBayed it for like $8 or something.
Nice.
So we will potentially be doing bowling, and then, of course, we might do the 16-person tournament, NES Open in the summer, when summer's coming up. But yeah, man, thanks so much for coming down this memory lane with me. I thought it was a really good topic. We've done this show for a long time. We never touched on the Sega Master System, so it was a perfect one to talk about. And again, everyone, I'm Andy. You could check out all my content. All the social links are below on my Twitch channel. I do TikToks, I do Twitters, I do everything. And I want to mention, before I go, I want to plug something that I know you're not big on Twitter, but we launched the retro gaming community on Twitter, which is a focus community where if you don't want to post things on your main feed, but want to share retro gaming community love, we have the retro gaming community. And dude, in about a month and a half we've had this, we are now over 1,135 members. And when we hit the 1,200 member mark, we are working with Game Tower, which is a local shop in LA, and they're going to be donating a game for a giveaway. We've already...
Nice.
DMC done 2 giveaways. We did a giveaway at DK Oldies where we gave away a Tetris NES cart, and then we did a giveaway with J&L Games, which is a New York City shop, and they gave away a Metroid NES copy.
Sweet.
So we are trying to, bring in the community by bringing in the shops, bringing in everyone. So if you're interested in this, I'm going to share the link in chat, and of course, you can go to my Twitter, and it's the pinned tweet as well. And I always like to say one thing, remember, we only get one shot at this, so be nice to people out there. We're really, we're going through a lot of ups and downs, hard times through the pandemic and whatnot, but video games keep us happy and healthy in many ways. DMC, I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be doing this again. Again, we'll see you guys next week. We have another guest. We have a guest every weekend this month. Wow. We're going to be closing out the month with another 2 guests coming up. So I'm really excited about that. Anyway, we will see you next time. This is Cafe BTW, a morning gaming podcast. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.